very kind of. I had two. One was a kind of sort of electronic message boards that signal certain things, connect certain spaces to each other. No more than that. The other was a kind of colour line notion. You know that thing where people go through caves and they're underwater divers and they leave a string behind them. That you have
or finding your way to the X-ray department.
But yet you have these different coloured strings telling you, sort of giving you ideas about how spaces connect. They run through space in one corridor and so on and so forth. So it's just a way of thinking how you can join these communities together.
This brief is great because the university have actually bought into it. We know that in reality we are not going to spend money on a new building for Jeff and I to live in this side of my retirement. But on the other hand, it's an interesting exploration. So you can say, okay, look around the spaces. I don't know if anyone suggested that there are areas that might be particularly ripe for redevelopment that you could look at, but you have the chance to create that unified space that we might find difficult to do in reality in the short term.
There seems to be a degree of tension throughout what we've already discussed between your ambition and that of higher powers, say, security that checks you around town, you store chairs and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
To what end do you have the same directive? Because obviously you're both trying to gain students, gain the brand that you mentioned earlier.
Well, you know,
and do you find that you are more at loggerheads than you are on the same wavelength?
I think that's a really good question because it isn't just, shall we say, the hierarchy. As an institution, how big is this university? How many staff is it? About 2,000 plus staff. Pushing 30,000 students is just huge. And the great majority of people who work for it may come into contact with students, but aren't tuned in to the students' experience. Obviously, the teaching staff are. I remember a colleague in engineering. It was a discussion about failures in the computer system, and someone from the technical services was sort of saying, well, I mean, we haven't had any complaints about lectures being cancelled because of failures in the computer system. And this guy said, no, we'll teach with a bit of broken nail on a slate if we have to, because I'm a teacher, that's my job, So of course nothing was cancelled. So there is that very interesting tension between people who really have a strong relationship with the learning that goes on. Now, I think it would be great, but also there is a growing agenda that actually the whole university, and the Vice Chancellor said this, needs to focus much more on the experience of students. So can we, through the buildings, help everyone to experience, can we reveal the experience of learning and teaching and what students, but our customers experience to everyone here so they begin to understand the point of it. And I think sometimes it is a question of making evident what the students do. The people who work in the canteen in Brussels, who see those students every day working feverishly in the canteen, but doing real student stuff, will have a much stronger sense of what the students are about than somewhere in the canteen here, where frankly it's just a canteen, and people are in groups doing something, but they're not giving evidence of being students. So how can we capture that idea of it's a learning community, it's not a place where students go to get processed?
There is the other dimension to that, which is a kind of much more practical way. Is this how much the kind of the tools of, for instance, health and safety, and all these kinds of issues that the institution's obsessed with. In one sense, quite right, but large and corporate institutions are kind of held up for the reasons for not doing certain things, as opposed to the idea that you wouldn't do something, therefore what do you need to do to enable it, rather than you can't do it, so that. And we do get a lot of smoke and mirrors about, reasons why the things are as they are, or why you should not necessarily do them differently. And that informs, as it were, the kind of the blood vein tension, if I call it that, rather than the conceptual notion of looking at are we conceptually, critically and strategically at loggerheads with the institution because we've got the wrong kind of, and they're inflexible. No, we're in a constant dialogue, and the constant dialogue can be anything from deciding whether you can hang knickers in the atrium or pyjamas in the atrium, or whether you can burn a Bible in the courtyard, yeah? And so it becomes it's at that level as well as the discourse level, at a higher level, that which we can look very politely.
And you won't find, if you talk to anyone in the senior management university, you find very few objections to almost anything. For instance, the director
What a great idea.
the director of corporate communications, who's I think next only to the vice chancellor, he loves anything we do. Like the washing line there, he was out selling it straight away. The trouble is that there are people who've got very specific responsibilities and they're fearful of what could go wrong. Genuinely. If you talk to the health and safety people, they are the most liberal, they're the most open, they're the most ambitious. It's the people who use the health and safety label. Oh, you can't do that, health and safety. Actually, you only have to say to them, oh, that's interesting. Well, what exactly is the regulation, or where does the risk lie? How do you do the risk assessment on that one then? And you find, oh well, no, we didn't. It's just an easy thing to put up. So sometimes you have to push hard. A lesson that I learned, this is kind of being put with my teacher hat on really rather than my client hat, that designers who always keep something up their sleeve, the extra thing, do well. So you might see an opportunity, but don't try and sell it before you've had a chance to work it out. You carry on doing so they think you're doing what they asked for, and if towards the end you say, well actually, it'll do this as well, and be confident that you've worked it all out, then people will usually be quite surprised. Oh, you can have that too, great, well yes, we will. Whereas if you go head on and try and sell something before you've done it, then
Yeah, there's a very interesting example of that in my area where I got a group of students, level 5, to actually model, make and set up a TV station on the intranet. So they actually recreated Shuffle, it's called Shuffle TV, on the web. And the idea was that they would program it, they would commission work for it, and then it would act as a vehicle of showcasing work as well as communicating the ethos of the subject. Now, of course, we had the intention that this should go on the website eventually, but it didn't start off by going to one and saying, we're thinking of doing this TV thing, would you? Because in a way, there would have been a lot of public liability, compliance, how do we control it? And then we'd have got a whole set of controls before we'd have even produced anything. So the brief to the students would have been about how you comply as opposed to how you create. So they create this thing, we show it then to people like John Palmer and Mark and so on, they go, wow, that's serious potential, but have we thought about how they're doing the compliance, or have we thought about what policy programming is? So it was an engagement, it was a point of engagement rather than a point of resistance. So that then floats, goes somewhere. And another reason why that's a good example is because it's another definition of space actually. That digital space, that space where things happen, not in these spaces, but in the spaces of distribution. So the big screen out there, Brader's piece was shown on about last February, that Chris was talking about, was showing there's an interesting anecdote there. People going, it was mainly actually facilities stuff. It's a bit too loud, that is, it's a bit too loud. Can't get the sound turned down. Well, John said, yeah, pump the sound up, make the presence felt. The sound is really important to that space. Changes spaces, change that space dramatically as from a walk-through space that you don't notice on the way to the level 5 canteen to somewhere where there was something happening, quite, a large scale. So thinking about those things can often create possibilities that are equivalent to the coloured piece of string that connects spaces up.
You mentioned earlier in the talk about branding and other institutes around the country and around the globe having their own brand and being successful. To what extent do you expect the building to aid in the branding of our institute?
I think that's really important.
And how do you anticipate that will probably compete?
Can I point you to, first of all,